Good evening and welcome to Crossroads. U.S. forces were attacked several times over the last 2 days in the Middle East. This comes after corporate media spread fake stories claiming that Israel bombed a hospital in Gaza. It's now clear that news outlets published false photos, they gave fake numbers of deaths, and they also pinned the blame on Israel, while it turns out it was a jihadist group operating alongside Hamas in Gaza. The stories on this led to mass protests and riots globally. In Washington, Representative Rashida Tlaib, she led a protest and a takeover of the Cannon House office building on Capitol grounds. She did this while agitating the crowd using the fake story, which she later refused to apologize for. Even Senator John Fetterman, a fairly hard-left Democrat, came out to criticize Congress members who blamed Israel. He wrote on X, "It's truly disturbing that members of Congress rushed to blame Israel for the hospital tragedy in Gaza. Who would take the word of a group that just massacred innocent Israeli citizens over our key ally?" Now, elsewhere in the United States, student groups and socialist movements continue with their protest against Israel and in support of Palestinians and Hamas. Yesterday, the U.S. State Department issued a worldwide caution, and this was an alert to Americans. It said due to increased tension in various locations around the world, the potential for terrorist attacks, demonstrations, or violent actions against U.S. citizens and interests, the Department of State advises U.S. citizens overseas to exercise increased caution. Now, around the world, including in many parts of Europe, there were mass protests on the streets as well, and these came amidst a recent string of actual Islamist terror attacks in some of those countries. After a teacher was stabbed to death in a terror attack in France, they deployed an additional 7,000 troops on their streets. French President Emmanuel Macron is now calling to deport immigrants who have ties with extremism. And in some Muslim countries, well, the fake news resulted in actual armed attacks from organized terrorist movements. Now, it's not clear what the scale of these is just yet, but a U.S. defense official told Reuters there were drone attacks on the U.S. Al-Tanf base, which is close to Syria's border with Iraq and Jordan. It was reported that Lebanon's Iran-aligned Al-Mayadeen TV, they claimed there was a missile attack on the U.S. military Kanako base, which is also in Syria. Details on these attacks are still pretty slim, but other attacks were actually confirmed by the Pentagon. The United States Naval Institute reported that USS Carney, which is a guided missile destroyer, shot down 3 missiles and 8 drones. These were launched from Houthi-controlled territory in Yemen. Now, the Houthis are an Iran-backed terrorist group, and Pentagon Press Secretary, Brigadier General Pat Ryder, he told reporters on Thursday there were no casualties to U.S. forces and none that we know of to any civilians on the ground. But he noted that it wasn't clear what the missiles they intercepted were, but that they were heading north, potentially towards targets in Israel. Now, he didn't say, again, which types of missiles they intercepted, but with Iran's backing, the Houthis do have long-range strike capabilities, including, notably, with land attack cruise missiles. Some of these would be able to strike at the southern parts of Israel. Alongside all of this, there was also an attempted attack on U.S. military bases in Iraq. U.S. Central Command confirmed that the United States intercepted 3 drone attacks, and these were targeting 2 different bases. U.S. CENTCOM said, in the last 24 hours, the U.S. military defended against 3 drones near U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq. In western Iraq, U.S. forces engaged 2 drones, destroying one and damaging the second, resulting in minor injuries to coalition forces. It says separately, in northern Iraq, U.S. forces engaged and destroyed a drone, resulting in no injuries or damage. They say they're continuing to assess the impact to operations. Now, U.S. CENTCOM added that in this moment of heightened alert, they say they are vigilantly monitoring the situation in Iraq and the region. They said they want to emphasize U.S. forces will defend U.S. and coalition forces against any threat. Now, taken as a whole, the various attacks, they are a concerning sign that the conflict between Israel and Hamas can possibly spread to other countries. Iranian TV, notably, they were claiming that terror proxy forces were expected to join the war against Israel. And Iran's supreme leader stated in an address that if these crimes continue, he said the Muslims will become impatient, the resistance forces will become impatient, and no one will be able to stop them. These groups would allegedly be Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. And keep in mind that we just saw terror groups in all of these areas just make attempts to strike U.S. forces and U.S. military bases. Now, the United States is at a serious risk right now of getting pulled into a war or even several wars. As I've been stating, the Chinese Communist Party is working to pull the United States into 4 wars. Keep in mind the various factions behind all of this that we're now watching. Iran is the common factor behind the terror groups that are now launching the attacks, including Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. Iran should be understood as just really not a lone actor. It ties into the global axis against the United States and its allies. These are China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, many satellite states, including in Latin America and Africa, and also throughout the Arab world. It's also now revealed that many of the weapons used by Hamas, the terrorists in their attack against Israeli civilians, they were likely North Korean weapons that had been brought to Iran. Now, it's not that well known, but North Korea is one of the world's largest arms traffickers. And with rumors that North Korea or even the CCP could supply weapons and ammo to Russia, notably separately for its war in Ukraine, Iran is again regarded as the proxy between them. It's the waypoint, which can help facilitate weapons trafficking for the war or even many wars, which are now happening. Now, it seems that the goal of the United States right now is to keep these wars as proxies, really, and to avoid getting pulled into direct involvement if possible. President Joe Biden gave an address to the nation from the Oval Office yesterday, and this follows notably his recent trip to Israel, where he met with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Biden focused his address on the importance, in his words at least, of backing Israel and Ukraine in their wars. But on this, it seemed that he suggested that Russia would become the big focus still, and that the goal with Israel and Hamas, well, that's going to be to prevent the conflict from growing. Well, folks, that's it for YouTube. For the rest of the episode, come join us on Epoch TV. We have a very good interview coming up. We're going to be speaking with Xi Van Fleet. She was a survivor of the Cultural Revolution in China, and she has a very important warning for Americans. She talks about how violence developed in China into what became a movement that killed, again, tens of millions of people over the course of Mao Zedong's reign in that country. She explains how what happened there is happening right now in the United States in the budding form. And she has some important history on how that developed. Again, that's on Epoch TV, EpochTV.com, and I will see you there. What is the real story of America? Why did the Founding Fathers choose a republic over a democracy? And what would the world be if the bedrock of the American Constitution was lost?